things that I've come to realize is kids aren't the only ones. In fact, as you go through the Gospels, one of the things that you will see is that Jesus loved to ask questions. Over 100 questions, in fact, are recorded throughout the Gospels. But here's what you need to know about Jesus. Jesus didn't ask questions to learn something. Okay? So oftentimes kids, when they're asking questions, they have a reason. They want to learn and they want an answer and they want to know something, but not Jesus. I mean, you're talking about God in the flesh. And so He's not asking questions to learn anything. When Jesus asks a question, He is asking the question to make a point, to make you think. You remember a couple of weeks ago I shared with you about how my wife will oftentimes ask me questions. For example, many times she'll ask me, when are you going to take out the trash? Now, my wife is not asking that question for me to give her an answer. And in fact, for me to give an answer to that question would really be to miss the point. What she's telling me to do is, look, Slate, the trash is overflowing, take it out. Right? She's trying to make a point with the question that she is asking. And that was Jesus. What we're going to do over the next couple of weeks is we're going to look at some of the most important questions that Jesus asked. And the first question that we're going to look at comes from Mark chapter 4. So you can go ahead and be turning there in your Bibles. Mark chapter 4, while you're looking there, I'll give you a little bit of context. What's going on here is you begin the chapter, Jesus has been teaching and preaching and He has drawn a large crowd. And so what He has to do is to get into this boat. In other words, this boat becomes His pulpit, you might say. But after a period of time, we're not exactly sure how long He'd been teaching and preaching. Notice what happens in verses 35 through 37. That day when evening came, Jesus said to His disciples, let's go to the other side. In other words, let's get away from the crowd. Let's take a break and let's go to the other side of the sea. And so leaving the crowd behind, they took Him along just as He was in the boat. And then if you continue reading, it says, a furious squall came up. Okay, so imagine this in your mind. They're in this boat, they're going across the Sea of Galilee, and a storm comes up. The waves are breaking over the boat so that it is nearly swamped. One of the things that I have researched, one of the things that I have found out about the Sea of Galilee, it is some 680 feet below sea level. And they tell you that the Sea of Galilee is surrounded by all these mountains. And so what typically happens is many times that cold air will come down from those mountains and it will mix with that warm sea air. And what do you think that produces? Storms, absolutely. And it can happen very quickly without warning. I mean, you can go out on the Sea of Galilee and it can be a beautiful day and then all of a sudden you're hit with this storm. I asked Matt and Britta Avery, they just got back from a trip and they had the opportunity to actually go out onto the Sea of Galilee, and Matt told me something very similar happened. You know, when they went out onto the Sea of Galilee, everything was calm, but once they got out there, a storm came up and blew in, and that's something that happens on the Sea of Galilee. It blows in. That's not uncommon. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever been out at sea and had trouble. In fact, let me see a show of hands. Anybody been out at sea and experienced any type of trouble? Let me tell you, it's scary. I was telling Darren and Jill Stoltz just the other day, I was doing some mission work in Antigua. And we had a day where we could, rest and relax and do whatever we wanted. And so me and one of my buddies, we decided that we were going to rent one of these small little sailboats. Okay? And so one of the natives there, he's trying to tell us how to steer and drive this sailboat, but he didn't speak very good English, and so I didn't understand a word he was saying. And so anyway, he gets the boat in the water, and he says, just put the sail up. And so we get into the boat, and I asked my buddy, I said, did you get all that? And he says, no. I said, well, I didn't either. I said, but how hard could it? How hard could it really be to drive a sailboat? And so anyway, we put the sail up, and evidently it's not hard at all. We shot out to sea, okay? We just flew out to sea, and once we got to a point where we could barely see land, I started to get scared. When you're out at sea, you feel so vulnerable, right? And so I was like, okay, we better turn this thing around. So anyway, we turn it around to where we're facing directly back in the direction from which we shot out and came, and guess what? There was no wind. And I was like, what's the deal? And what I didn't understand, and for those of you who've driven sailboats, you know what I'm fixing to say next. What I didn't understand and what the guy was trying to tell me is, look, when you start coming in, you've got to zigzag, right? You've got to go with the wind. You can't just turn around and come back in the way you came out. But I didn't know that, and so we're sitting there and we're waiting. We're like, what's going on? And as we're waiting, we're drifting out to sea, and our boat turns a little bit, and a side wind hits us, and it flips us out there. And I am panicking. I'm scared to death. I'm thinking I am going to drown. And so we're working, and finally we get this little sailboat back up. And we work together on climbing back in the boat. And we're like, okay, let's get this thing back in. But there was no wind taking us in. And so we drift further out to sea, and we turn a little bit. Side wind hits us, and we flip over again. And I am panicking, and besides panicking, I am praying, God, please save me. Because I was really scared I was going to drown. And so anyway, we finally get the boat back over. We help each other get back in the boat, and I was like, we have got to take this sail down. We cannot allow that to happen again. And so anyway, we took the sail down, and of course we're not getting any wind at that point, and so we're just out at sea, and we're drifting further and further out. Now, it could have been over a period of 30, 40, 50 minutes. I don't know. It seemed like we were out there forever, and land was just getting further and further away, and I was becoming more scared every minute that passed. And I thought, man, we're just going to disappear. We're going to be gone. But then finally, the man who rented us the boat came looking for us, found us out there, hooked us up to his boat, and pulled us in. But it's terrifying, right? When you are out at sea and you have trouble. And so imagine, you've got the disciples, and I realize they're fishermen. They probably encountered storms before, but this storm comes up, and the wind's blowing, and the waves are breaking against the boat, and they think they're going to die. They think that they're going to drown. And so notice what happens. Verses 38 through 41, Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. Then the disciples woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up and he rebuked the winds and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. And then he said to his disciples, and here's our first question in the series, why are you so afraid? That's a good question, right? And again, Jesus is not really looking for an answer as much as He is trying to make a point. Guys, why are you afraid? Think about all the amazing things that you have seen me do. You have seen me give sight to those who are blind. You have seen me take someone who is deaf and give them their hearing back. You have seen me take water and turn that into wine. Guys, why in this world are you so afraid? And then he goes on to say, do you still have no faith? And it says that the disciples, they were terrified, and they asked each other, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey Him. We're going to use this word storm really metaphorically this morning, because I believe as So it's already been pointed out this morning by Wayne that we all experience storms. We all experience hard times in our lives. And, you know, one of the things that you discover is many times life can be like the Sea of Galilee, right? I mean, everything is going good. Everything is going great one moment. Everything is normal, or maybe for you, you're in a season where it's as good as it has ever been, and then all of a sudden, boom, out of nowhere, you're hit with a storm. Maybe things are going great at work. I mean, you're having a month that you have never had before in sales, but then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you hear that your company is going to make some cuts. And guess what? You're one of the newest members to the team, and so more than likely, you're going to be the man to go. And so now you're in the middle of a storm. Or maybe everything is going great with your family. Your relationship with your spouse is good. Your relationship with your kids is good. The kids are making good grades in school. And you know, your wife or your husband goes in for just a routine checkup and discovers that they're sick. Maybe it's cancer. Maybe it's leukemia. And man, you go for things that are going so well to now, man, you're in this boat and your world's being rocked. You're in a storm. Or maybe everything is going good and then all of a sudden, man, you start to have these financial struggles. Maybe the car is having trouble and your washer's going out, or maybe everything's going good and someone that you love very, very dearly passes away. And now, man, you are right in the middle of a storm. And maybe you're starting to think like the disciples thought. Let me ask you this question first of all. How many of you, and I'd like for you to be very open and honest this morning, how many of you would say that right now you're in a storm? Maybe something going on with your spouse, maybe something going on with your kids, maybe it's work, maybe it's school, maybe it's, for those of you who are older, maybe it's one of your parents. And right now you're in a storm. And so oftentimes what we do is we start to think many times like the disciples. And you say, well, what was on their mind? Well, look at the question and you'll see it. Look at what they asked Jesus. They say to Jesus, don't you care? How many of you can relate to that? Honestly, how many of you have ever felt like that? You're in the middle of a storm and you thought to yourself, God, where are you? I have been calling out to you. It just doesn't appear that you've been listening. It just doesn't appear like you care. Kind of reminds me, I've just finished up the book of Job, my own personal study, a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, we tend to really zero in on Job and his faith. He lost everything from his wealth to his health. He lost all of his kids, but he stayed firm in the faith. And many times what we do is we lift him up, but we criticize his wife, right? But let me remind you that she also lost those things. Those were her kids too. Those were her cattle or her wealth too. And this is her husband who is suffering from this debilitating disease, all of these terrible, terrible boils, and this is how she's feeling. You know, God, do you really care? She looks at her husband and she says, Job, what you need to do is you just need to curse God and you need to die. Because evidently He doesn't care about us. And we can sit back and we can be very critical of Job's wife, but honestly, how many of us have ever had those moments where we thought, man, does God really care? And here are the disciples and they're asking that same question to Jesus. Do you care? Why? Because Jesus was asleep in the boat. Now, I want to make this point. I don't believe that Jesus was asleep because of a lack of concern. I believe He was asleep because of a lack of request. I really believe that. I believe that the disciples, when this storm hit, man, they started working, doing everything they could to survive this storm within their own power. I mean, they'd probably been in storms before, so they're bailing water. They're turning the stern into the storm so they don't get, toppled over like me and my friend did. They're doing all these things, but to no avail. It wasn't getting any better. And so finally they go to Jesus. I really believe, and maybe you think differently about this, I really believe that Jesus would have calmed the storm sooner had they gone to Him. But you see, they sat there and they tried to do this on their own. I think about James chapter 4, verse 2. Think about what James says here. This is the half-brother of Jesus. He says, you don't have because you don't what, church? You don't ask of God. See, the disciples, man, they waited till the situation was completely desperate before they awakened Jesus. And I think so oftentimes we can be guilty of the same thing. We do everything within our power to handle problems on our own. Well, I'll just borrow money, or I'll just get another counselor. I'll spend some time with our children on vacation, and then I'll straighten things out. But what we need to do is we need to call on the Lord. I don't usually talk about politics at all. But can I share with you one of the things that really concerns me about politics? And you can criticize me for this or not, and you can say I'm crazy, and that's okay. A lot of people think I'm crazy. But anyway, one of the things that really bothers me about politics, especially this time of year, is people will pinpoint a certain individual, a candidate, and many times they get in their mind, this individual is going to save us. You hear what I'm saying? I have literally heard, and I'm not going to criticize Donald Trump or anybody out there, but I've literally heard people say Donald Trump is going to save this country. And can I tell you, there is only one person who can save this country, and that is God. And that's where we need to start putting our faith, not in self, not in mankind, but God Almighty. Israel got into that trouble, right? They started looking around and they wanted a king. And God had been their king. He was the one who was taking care of them. But they began to look inwardly. Who among us can we choose to provide for us and take care of us? God's in control. Let's look to Him. They go through this storm and Jesus stands up. He rebukes the wind, He rebukes the waves, and the storm becomes calm. And there are some things from this story that I think we need to remember, okay? There are some things I think God would want us to take away from this story. First of all, number one, when you're in a storm, you need to know and you need to remember you're not alone in this storm. The presence of our good God, He's with you. And that's good news, right? I mean, you look at Mark chapter 4 again, verses 37 through 38, and it talks about this squall that comes up, and the waves are breaking over the boat, and it's nearly sinking, and then you get into verse 38, and you find out where Jesus is in the boat, right? Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. But here's the point we need to take with us. Where was Jesus, folks? He's in the boat. There's this storm going on, and Jesus is right there with them. He is in the boat. Now, some of you may be asking, well, if I'm with Jesus, there shouldn't be any storm, right? I mean, if I'm a Christian and I give my life to Jesus, then everything should be smooth sailing for the rest of my life. And the reason I bring that up is because so oftentimes this is what I see, and we need to teach on this more and more and more, and that is this. Don't lose your faith in the storm. In fact, so oftentimes what you'll see is people, they will come to Jesus and then, man, a storm blows up and it's just like, I'm one of your children. I thought this wasn't supposed to happen to me. That's not what the Bible teaches. Matthew chapter 5 verse 45 says, He causes His Son, that's God, causes His Son to rise on the evil and the good, and He sends what, y'all? He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. In other words, whether you're good or bad, whether you're Christian or not Christian, let me tell you something. God is going to bless you. He's going to give sunshine to your life. But you know what? He's also going to bring rain. Even as a Christian, you're going to experience storms. Life is not going to be perfect. In fact, Jesus teaches us the opposite, right? John 16:33, in this world you will have what? I mean, He says it, trouble. In this world it's going to happen. But He says, take heart. He says, I've overcome the world. And so Jesus never promised that this life would be easy. He never promised that this life was going to be promise-free. But here's what He does promise. The storm will never sink you. Why? Because God's with you. And God's for you. And there is nothing that can take you out of the presence of God. And that is so big. That's huge. Do you realize that? You know, there was an article that came out a long time ago about older people, and in the article it just simply said, as an older person, those who have something or someone living in their house, and it can be anything, okay? Anything living in your house will help you to live longer. It can be a deaf old man who doesn't talk back. It can be a gerbil. It can be a hamster. It can be a cat. It can be a dog. It can be a plant. But studies show that those who have something or someone living in their house, they tend to live longer. You know what? Every now and then, some of you're going to be in the middle of a storm and it's going to be really bad. And people are going to look at you and they're going to say, man, how are you getting through this? How are you enduring this? I mean, how come your world isn't falling apart? How is it that you have peace in this storm? And as a Christian, you can look at them and say, because there is someone living in my house. And let me tell you something, it's not just life, it is the author of life who is with you. His presence is with you. You're not going through this alone. And so you can say, He's present with me. And because of that, I can sense His strength. I can sense His power. I can sense His comfort because He is with me. Listen to me this morning, and you may want to write this down. Never let the presence of a storm cause you to doubt the presence of God. And so oftentimes that's what happens. We start dealing with difficulty. We start going through stuff that's really tough, and we start to doubt the presence of God. You'll hear people say, well, I don't even believe in God because of this, and this that's happened, or because I've witnessed this. Why? Because they're in the middle of a storm. But don't doubt the presence of God when you're in the presence of a storm. He's there. And you know what? You may pray to Him, and sometimes He may lift you directly up out of that pit or out of that storm. But as I heard Josh Ross say one time, and I love this, and I believe it with all my heart, sometimes He doesn't pull you out as much as He just gets in the pit with you or gets in the storm with you and just holds you. And that's what we need. The presence of a good God. Let me share with you two passages I want you to take with you this morning, and I want you to personalize these passages. In fact, I've already done it up on the screen. I've already personalized it. We're going to use the word my here. And I want you to read these two verses with me. Psalm 46 verse 1. Y'all ready? God is my refuge. He is my strength. He is my ever-present help in a time of trouble. Here's the other one to take home with you, Hebrews 3 verse 5 or 13 verse 5. And again, I've already changed it as well. Personalizes for you. Read it with me. Never will my God leave me. Never will He forsake me. And that's the truth. That's good news. We always have the presence of God. Now, something else we need to know about storms is storms, you know what, can be used for God's purposes. Let me ask you a question. I want you to think about this. Whose idea was it to go to the other side of the sea? Jesus, right? Now, why did Jesus want to go to the other side of the sea? We've already said that Jesus is God in flesh, right? And so He knows all. And one of the things that He knows is that there is a man on the other side of the sea, and we talked about this man last week, who is out of his mind. He is in this cemetery, he's in this tomb, and he's calling out, and he's cutting himself because he's full of demons, and Jesus knew that he needed to be healed. He needed to be set free from what enslaved him. But you know what? God also, or Jesus also being God in the flesh, He also knew that on the way there, they were going to go through a storm. And so if we sit here and we logically think about this morning, I think we could say that they were not in a storm because they were out of God's will, right? So oftentimes when people go through hard times, we think, well, they're outside the will of God. They're a bad person. They've done this. The disciples thought that, right? They saw a blind man or a lame man, and they'd say, Jesus, whose fault is this? Is this the fault of his parents? Or is this the fault of himself? You know, what sin has he committed? And Jesus says, whoa, you've got that all wrong. Sometimes bad things happen because of us and the things that we choose. But then sometimes things happen and we're perfectly inside the will of God. And that was the disciples. They're in the will of God. They're going with Jesus. They're crossing this lake. And some of you may be asking this morning, well, are you telling me that God caused this storm? Are you telling me that God allowed this storm? And you know what? The fact of the matter is I can't answer that. God is God and I'm not, and He knows all and I don't, and so I can't sit back and say, yes, He did this and He did this and He did this and this is why He did it, because He's God and I'm not, and I don't understand everything. I don't know all about God, but I'll tell you something that I do know about God. God can use these storms to do a work inside us. Powerful verse, James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. James says, consider it pure joy. And the phrase, the phrasing there means to move to a state of worship within your soul, to praise God. Are you with me? Praise God, James says. Whenever you face trials of many kinds, and you say, well, that sounds ridiculous. Why would I praise God when I'm going through hard times? He tells you, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let the perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. How many of you need to mature spiritually? How many of you would say, honestly, I'm not complete? Well, you know what? God will use certain things to grow us, to help us mature spiritually, to get us to where we need to be. And I think there's a list of things we could throw out there, whether it's God's Word, whether it's spiritual gifts He helps us to discover so that we can serve others. But I definitely think included in that list, as James is pointing out, would be storms. God can use storms. He can use hard times to help us mature. Help us grow. I want you to do something this morning. I want you in your mind, I want you to picture someone or think about someone that you believe is rock solid in their faith. I mean, of all the people that you can think of, I mean, this is a person you would say, man, they just have this rock solid faith. And here's what I'll tell you about that individual that you are thinking about right now, that person has been in a storm with the presence of God. I guarantee it. And they have this rock solid faith because they've been there and they know His faithfulness. They know His presence. They have learned that there is a purpose in every storm that God is often doing in us and teaching us something in the middle of that storm that we couldn't learn any other way. Did God cause it? Did He allow it to happen? I don't know, but God can always use it to do big things in us. But the disciples hadn't gotten there yet. They were still growing. They were still maturing. And this was part of the process. In fact, you look at Mark chapter 4, verse 39, and you begin to see how this storm helped them to grow. Jesus stands up. He rebukes the wind and the waves. He says, "Quiet, be still." The wind dies down. The waves go completely calm. And then in verse 40, this is what they said. They were terrified and they asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey Him." You say, well, I mean, what are you getting at here, Slate? Well, if you go back, what did they refer to Jesus as when the storm started? Come on, you can say it. Teacher. Teacher, teacher. Don't you care? We're about to drown. Teacher, right? I mean, that's what they looked at Jesus as simply a teacher, just another rabbi. But after they endure this storm, after they see the presence of God, as you continue to read through the gospel, He goes from teacher to Lord. Lord. Who do people say that I am? You are the Son of God. Are you going to leave me too? Who else would we turn to, Lord? I believe this was a big part of them growing into who they were going to see Jesus as reverent and holy. And they were just all filled by the power and the presence of God. I believe that their hope was no longer in the boat, but their soul, because of that storm, became anchored in the Lord. You know, we could use that metaphorically as well, the boat, anything in the world, we're in the boat. And so oftentimes people will put their hope in what's around them, in the boat, in the world. Don't put your hope in the boat. Anchor your soul in the Lord. And when you do, let me tell you, it's a life changer. Because you will see how God works in your life. And so this morning we're going to extend the invitation. There may be some of you here this morning, you're in the midst of a storm and you just want prayers. You want prayers for strength. I think a lot of you probably this morning would say, "Hey man, I hear what you're saying and I know that God's with me, but that doesn't make it any easier. I mean, it's still tough. And so I need prayers. I need prayers to endure this. I need prayers to have peace and comfort as my family goes through this. We'd love to pray for you. One of our elders will come forward this morning, and one of our elders can meet you in the room to the right in the back and would love to pray for you this morning. Or it may be this morning that you're not a Christian. Stop putting your hope in the boat. Give your life to the Lord because He's the only one that can save you. And so this morning, come to Jesus. Put on Christ in baptism, confessing your faith, believing that He is the Son of God. And so if you need to respond, won't you do so as together we stand as we sing.